Carlos Nelson with Cascade Media Group, and tonight we have a distinguished guest on. I would say I go back with this gentleman almost 40 years, if not 40, when we were young and we associated. I want this. I'm gonna use the word. We ran around together, and if you see in the background, Miss Carol Cole's picture, and she was like a mentor to me, and I know she was very influential with Senator Haley. Without further ado, uh, our guest tonight is Senator Haley. He's up for re-election, and uh, he wants to talk to the community about his platform, and he wants to talk to the community about his stint in the Senate. Uh, so, without further ado, welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Carlos. And thanks again for helping to coordinate some time to discuss what's happening in both sides of our state line, our greater Kansas City. So what's up, Kansas City?
I like that. uh, Run it down. First of all, tell our audience, weren't you a state rep first?
I was. I've
All
had
right.
the pleasure of serving for 3 terms or 6 years in the
So
Kansas
talk to our community. Let them know how long that you've been fighting for community rights and the different things that you represent. And from state rep to your Senate seat.
Well, as you were saying in your very gracious introduction, we fought at different levels and continue to strive at different levels for trying to find some parity, to find a voice, and the struggle continues. But for me, it's been since I came back to Kansas City. I'm a native Kansas City Kansan, and I came back, and after I came out of Howard Law, Morehouse undergrad, and so that I could try and find some kind of avenues for housing. For me, it was about as a student coming back, trying to find some housing or some opportunities to renovate our inner city houses and not lose them to demolition. It was a big issue for me back then. It's a big issue now, a luda continuum, if you will. The struggle does continue for those of us as we talk about the underhoused and what used to be known as the homeless. And we have these architectural, beautiful structures often in what they like to classify as depressed areas that they'd rather demolish than rebuild. When I say they, I mean that power structure that finds value in the reclamation of land that has been traditionally held by a marginalized people, often in the Black community. I won't say the brown community because the brown community didn't exist as much as it does now when we first started that struggle. That's what got me from the law more into politics, but issues have branched out since then.
So let's talk about, like I said, I want you to go back about your when you was a state rep and what was you able to accomplish at that level. That's a lower level than your senator position right now. Talk about a little few things that you were able to accomplish uh, in the 3 or 4 years that you were a state rep.
Actually, I was very highly favored to spend 6 years, 3 terms, three
All
two-year
right.
terms in the state house. And it was a good proving ground, as has often been the case, which, by the way, is why I'm no fan of term limits. There are no term limits in the Kansas legislature, as it should be. And regrettably, there are some in Missouri. And you see some of the people that become effective legislators who, just as they get their stride and hit their note, are suddenly finding themselves at odds because they're up against a time crunch. Term limits tend to lend themselves, Carlos, to the staff running the show or the special interest, because if it's adversarial to what the special interests or what the staff see, they'll just wait that legislator out until she or he can be replaced because of this artificial block. But in my 6 years, to your question, I was able to establish myself, I think, as a voice for the often downtrodden, being a defender, as I like to call myself, of the downtrodden. And I did my best. Now, I'm no Carl Bussey, who has been the quintessential defender of the downtrodden. but I didn't have the ability to transcend as well as he did. Or of even as you mentioned, one of my mentors, and I don't use that word often, Carol Coe, who brought me to the Missouri side as a Kansan and allowed me to work for her as a as first her council aide, where I was able to meet luminaries up and coming like yourself, luminaries all across the political and social and entrepreneurial diaspora from within the African American and surrounding communities prior to my having been in the State House in Kansas for the first 6 years. And later, there were others who helped mold and shape during that time with agenda items I hadn't considered. One of those, I have to say, is my friend Alvin Sykes.
Let's talk about his book. Show his book.
I got to do that. I mentioned in it, it's Alvin Lee Sykes, Show Me Justice. It's been published now, and it is available on Amazon. I say that because his estate, which is championed by another great Kansas City, Jamu Webster, now of Ghana, that this is available, written by Monroe Dodd. And Alvin, Carol Coe, people that were the mosquito in your ear about how we frame the dialogue constantly, and to not forget that we have that responsibility to community, Carlos. You know what I mean? You can call
I wanted to interrupt you, but I didn't when you were talking about how you were concerned with housing, because Alvin Sykes and myself was homeless, and as before we got on the air, we were talking about 5501 Cleveland,
right.
Boys Learning Center. I'm sleeping in my car outside the daggone place. Alvin was inside, and Alvin said, "Come on inside." And I start sharing office with Dr. Leon Dixon, and he really enlightened me on a lot of Black intellectuals that, like Frantz Fanon and other intellectuals, about what we should be doing with our political power and our economic power, and who we put in these positions in the state house, in the councils, and what have you, very important. I think some of that, some of the political representation we've had over the last 30 years has changed a little bit. We talked off camera, uh, and that's why it's so important for our community to hear what your platform is and how you view what you can do with the community support uh, to help overcome some of the deficiencies that people of color in your district and in general, what you're fighting for.
Well, again, I thank you, and I thank Cascade and What's Up Kansas City, because you have the broad reach inside of various media. And to your point, things have changed during the time since you and I first began, and we came from where we were and struggling to where we were to try and have the impact that you're having in a broader media circle, and the lesser impact that I'm trying to have within the circle of how we reframe the social and political discussion for how do we define progress? What is the definition of progress? Too sadly, the more these institutions have been challenged, the more they've reformed themselves, those that would keep us marginalized. And indeed, we too have become, to a certain extent, an enemy from within ourselves. We see that during this presidential discussion as to whom will continue to lead this country if it's a Biden or Trump mentality, and that we cannot define progress in a monolithic view. It's diverse. But to your point, or to your question, someone pointed out the other day, well, Haley, you're the only one in the Kansas City metro area from within the Black community that's been consistently elected for the last 30 years to one post or another. There's only one other that has been at the forefront of the discussion and has, by a great grace and insight, grace of God, managed to avoid, pitfalls and scandal. And there's only one other in the metro area who's been defined in that circle. And of course, The only other one who has that longevity is, you know, and I know that has been in longer, would be the Honorable Emmanuel Cleaver. Okay. The godfather of Kansas City metropolitan area politics, who has served in various capacities as he has. So being on the Kansas side, being the lesser by far to everything that mayor, now congressman, well, first councilman, then councilman, mayor, now Congressman Cleaver has been able to do during the same span of time that I'm been in first the State House and now in the Senate now for 24 years. Carlos, I say to you and say to those that are paying attention that to be diligent in what exactly is progress for our community. I would ask you, one who is able to look at the different areas across the board. We talk about what's happening within our chambers, be they the Black Chamber of Commerce, within our media circles. We have various print media, but do we still get the news? We have, of course, those media such as yours uniquely that's able to move with the change, to look at the progress. You're able to speak in real time because you're able to reinvent what didn't exist when I got started. That is to beam onto a cell phone or to have yourself in real time heard and not wait until that print comes out next day or even next week.
So, I like what you're saying, cutting you off.
No, you have to.
Real time. And to show you how effective that is, you and myself for the last 2 days have been trying to get this interview squared away. 2 times today, we couldn't, whatever our schedules, but bam, and we're here in real time. And information applied is power. If there's $10,000 over here at this address and it's only going to be there for 15 minutes, but anybody that can come there can get $10,000, that can't be printed in the paper and it come up Friday. And you know they were giving $10,000 away. And everything has moved minute by minute, second by second. And information applied is power. And we have not adjusted to that in our community. The second thing is we say we want to increase our voter registration and get more people in our community involved, but we're not using the tools that are currently available that anyone in our community in general, not just minorities, from I would say almost 1 year old to your 50s or 40, middle 40s, they use a phone. And you know, you got kids, and I think you got grandkids. They put that phone in their hand soon, and they're looking at their programs and all of this digital stuff. So I'm not understanding the political representation not using the format that needs to be used to engage the voting population that is, like I said, from 1 year old to about 45. You need all forms of communication. You need the cable, you need the weeklies, the bi-weeklies, but above all, you have got to have the digital communication, and it has to be able to reach the people that are not plugged in. And I say, woe is the politician, woe is the political organization that does not understand how important media is and how important, if you're in a position of authority and power, whether it's a school superintendent or in a corporation, when you're not supporting your own media that is giving you information in your own voice, we need to have an instant reset, and that's what I feel uh, is happening right now. Our community, different individuals are reassessing uh, their ability to change the landscape from policies that are affecting us and laws that are affecting us. So,
Mhm.
with that
Well,
being said,
and that having been said, it's a hybrid that I don't understand. I mean, it's up to you to appreciate it. I was saying to Eric Wesson, who started now the next page after after the call, at the call and the next page, and then my friend at the Voice, Benita
Bonita
Gooch,
Gooch, right?
who was talking about the whole thing with whether the Chiefs and Royals with this paper were going to come to Kansas. That was my agenda. There has to be the hybrid of because of the intergenerational connection. Because some people, like myself, I got to get around to it at some point to sit down with the physical paper
Right.
and go back and use it as a reference because I don't have the sophistication like you have to be able to go online and find out where that blog is or where it is. You have to train me, people like of my generation, to do that. A lot of my constituency are still rooted in that which they can touch and feel, even though it's dated. They've missed the $10,000 that's available down the street because they're waiting for the paper to run and to come out and what have you. I find that also with my newsletters, which were electronic, that have become more electronic than the paper one. It's not worth the franking or the mail privileges because, well, but some people have told me, Haley, I get your newsletter and I'm glad to use it as a reference to go back to have the solid paper in my hand to look at some of those issues because we don't have the intergenerational sophistication. And by the way, I'm just a father, haven't had any grandkids. My eldest daughter, Mariah, is practicing law, and she's engaged to another local Kansas City. I know you, Herb and Lisa Hardwick's son, Zach Hardwick, and my daughter
Mm-hmm.
Mariah Haley are engaged. And I certainly hope they hold off having any children and making me a grandfather until all the nuptials come off. But they instinctively, that generation, Mariah and Zach's generation, as attorneys, both of them, as they are, that's the only way they move it. That's the only thing they understand. But I represent 100,000 people in Kansas City, and I'd say, Carlos, easily 2/3 of them, but those that are voting are of the generation that has to have something tangible. They don't log in like we have. The only time they're looking at the news is one of the evening news, like you. I'm sure you probably watch the evening news on the major networks. I would guess you might.
Yeah. Listen, yourself and myself, our generation, get my coffee and give me my damn paper.
Right, exactly, exactly. So don't count us out yet because we're still participatory in what's happening in our society, what's happening in our community, even though it's dated news. It's no longer news in quotes, if you will, because it happened a day or two or last week ago. But sometimes we have to have that chronicle. We have to have that something that we can touch to refer back to. And I got a whole stack of newspapers. If I change the picture right here that we're looking at right now, I could show you a library right across the way of various papers that I want to reference and keep on to. So there's still a place for it. Even if I digitize it or put it on, there's still a place for that. It's a chronicle of where we are and where we've been, even though we could probably find it online through some other means.
This is what I now, one of the key things that the Kansas City Business Association and Cascade Media is promoting. We have a campaign on block voting and group economics. Uh, could you speak a little bit about that? How do you think that can enhance people of color's position politically and economically?
Well, the jury's still out. We would hope that it would. I think that we have to have a core message. Back in the old days, we had organizations or entities we could look to. I remember, and you remember, that we used to have slates that were handed out or that were presented You remember those days? They say, whose slate do you have? And they go, are you carrying this organization's slate or this one or this person's slate or another? But right now, there's no cohesion, or there are very few. There's still some respected organizations who will remain nameless right now because I know
Well,
that you're
let me say
non-political,
this.
apolitical.
Freedom Inc.,
Yeah,
when I came to Kansas City, I'm gangster posing as a businessman. I didn't know nothing about no damn politics, but I moved over there in Sheridan. They helped civilize me over there. And when elections came, I voted straight freedom ticket because they were representing us and we were getting benefits, uh, big benefits. You want to build Bonnie Alice Plaza? Hasley and them was like, ain't no plaza being, we not voting on none of that unless we can get a part of that. And Alex Harris had his contractors, which I was one of them, and they made sure that we was getting a part of any of the economic things that our tax dollars were paying for. But now we don't really have a workforce.
So to your point, who is in a position to deliver for those voting blocks, those core blocks, for what it is that they should work hand in glove. You should have a core support politically that will speak economically if it delivers. You know, who will do it? We used to have a precinct and ward committee system that would speak for those votes as freedom, since you mentioned freedom.
I'm saying let me make myself clear to everybody. There's no other organization over here in Missouri that's going to be representing Black people for the next 30 years, 40 years. Freedom is the organization that represents us. Now, from my perspective, the challenge is to bring uh, the different interests within freedom to focus on a strategy, a long-term strategy that will benefit us, as I said, by changing policies and changing the law. And then on the other hand, with economics, allow us to understand that, like over in KCK, the school district, isn't that primarily people of color, whether Hispanic or what have you? So you have all of these corporations doing business with a lot of different entities that represent minorities, but what are they doing in the community? And so back then, the lady behind you, Carol Cole, if you were not, yeah, I like that, Dave. If
looking over my shoulder, looking over my shoulder. She's looking at you. She's looking at you, Carlos.
Yeah. Hey, you know, and she's like, hey, we're doing this over here. Y'all need to kick in. What are you doing in the community? And I don't think our political people are looking at these things. Who's giving all the milk to the schools? Now, what are you doing, Highland Dairy or whatever, in the community? You got a big contract, and there's a lot of money that is being spent in our community, but we're not getting no return on it. Can you speak on that?
Well, who gauges that? I mean, somebody has to be getting something. I know that there have been people with the contractors. You mentioned Jim Watts, and I mean, I remember. I mean, I used to be on the board of the Black Archives. In fact, I was the last appointment that Pete put on before his untimely death. That Horace Peterson put on it, and I remember when we were meeting, you knew that, and he was talking about Horace Peterson was talking about trying to get them. He had everything in the back of his station wagon, but he had a dream talking about, you know, sharing our history in mid America and having
Dave,
this.
you bring it up really.
And so, but what I'm saying though is, and he was upset about the lack of support from the leadership, political leadership, for what he knew we need to have. And now, of course, if you go to 17th and Vine or right over there, there's no question that there's been a public-private partnership to develop something he was thinking about 40 plus years
There
ago.
we go.
And that is it. How did it happen? So my question is turning it back to you. What is the silver bullet? Or is it just a matter of time or diligence?
It's a
Or
matter
what is
of
it that
us
makes it
coming
go?
together collectively. That's the main. Block voting and group economics does not work unless you can build numbers. You can't build numbers if you're getting into personalities and other things. You have to be. I like a Cadillac. How many people like Cadillac that don't have the same religion, don't look alike, that the same color, but they like Cadillac? So if you want block voting and group economics, you just got to stay on point with that. I can't vote for all this other stuff, but I can be in agreement that block voting will move the needle ahead on politics and on policy. And we have to come back to that. That's what worked when we were young. They said, you're not going to build no Barney Alice Plaza or anything else unless we can get a part of that construction. But we had minority contractors, and we had 40 or 50 contractors that could do the work. And so when our political arm moved, they had the backup. I remember Archie Welch, when all this digital stuff was just coming into play. Him and I think Troy, his name was Troy, they wound up getting the phone company. I remember Houston getting the contract at the county for the jail. A lot of different things were opening up for Black businessmen to participate in because our political leadership put the pressure on when the downtown council or whatever, when they wanted to develop anything, we were going to get a slice. But I think over the last 30 years, people start that are representing us start looking at their self-interest. And I've
Oh,
said
I-
over the last
you,
since I started my this national campaign on block voting and group economics, is that uh, we've got to try to put the past in the past, and we've got to try to see how we can have a brighter future by coming together.
well, I mean, I do appreciate the fact that there's successes. I look to Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri, as we're having this discussion now as to the relocation potentially of the stadium for the Royals and the Chiefs and the fusion of what's in the better interest. You talked about our school district being overwhelming. In fact, Kansas City, Kansas, the influx of our new citizens from outside of our borders that are moving into KCK, while at the same time, the migration of traditional from the Black and white communities moving from KCK. There is such a fluidity in our population. There has been no stable. We have our first Black mayor here, Tyrone Garner, and who's in battle with the commission. There is no block voting. There is no cohesion. I remember when I worked for Carrie Stapleton at Phillips West, and she did the Bartle Hall expansion. They were talking about the hair curlers and the which are now those 4 icons that are above Bartle Hall. And the pushback in the Kansas City, Missouri community, again, because Carol Cole and Carrie Stapleton brought a Kansan, attorney Daive Haley, over to work in Missouri. I was there at the groundbreaking. I still have the shovel and the hard hat when the Bartle Hall expansion was there. And the discussion that came right there because of the east of, west of truce discussion, which you may remember, may not. There was a talk about what was on one side of town and the other, how there was nothing going on the east of truce. And from that discussion right there at Bartle Hall, that block voting came out and Cleveland was talking about it. We got to do something east of truce. And that was the discussion for what would become 18th and Vine.
Well,
That was it. That was the development for 18th and Vine because of putting those hair curlers above Bartle Hall. That was to the tune of, I don't know if you remember this, Carlos.
no, I
The,
remember
the argument,
distinctly.
the argument was how much, how much they were spending for those 4 pieces of art. And the community was outraged. It was $1 million. It was $1 million, what, 35, whatever, however long, what, 40 years ago. $1 million for those strange looking that would define the skyline for Kansas City, Missouri. And it wasn't just flyover community anymore because you know where you were if you saw those hair curlers that are still there. But it was $1 million, and people pointed out, do you know what $1 million could do to ease such and such and such and such Easter truce? And here you're doing all this for downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Once again, that divide, and the block voting came together and said, we've got to have something we can define as a destination on our side of town. And that was the discussion that together collectively brought about the development of what's 18th and Vine now.
So we're going to close out here. What would you have to say to your constituents and the voters over in KCK?
Well, what I'd say is that, and I appreciate the question, that we've got to pay very close attention to our traditional neighborhoods and what we are, who we are and what our identity is. There are forces that may be of the same party, but are different from us. I mean, they are, Johnson County is the largest economic engine, and much of it has become more Democrat, believe it or not, Johnson County, Kansas, than Republican. However, the value system, just because they're of the same party affiliation, and that regionalism is drastically different from traditionally what our roots have been and who we've been tied in and what we believe in historically. And we see the same schism nationally. The other day, we had that discussion in that primary where a New York congressman, long time, was ousted. And so the same thing is happening in all of our communities, Black and brown, especially those who've been traditionally marginalized. So we need to find a way, in closing, to find our core values and to have them replicated and amplified when it comes to the ballot box, and not be swayed by partisan affiliation necessarily. But traditionally, we look to organizations where we didn't have a Freedom Inc., where we were looking at the churches. Remember, everybody go to the churches. We no longer have that as a galvanizing united force. So I don't know. I don't know. I guess
But
is what I'm saying is
let me
we've
say
got to
this.
find some way.
We are not experiencing anything that the white community is not. Just before we got on air, I was looking at PBS and some white Christians, and they were saying they were Methodists, that they couldn't even go to the churches no more because they drive 40 minutes to a Methodist church that has their values. They say they 5 or 6 churches, they're mixing the politics and the religion, and that's not their cup of tea. And they just did there's so many people now becoming agnostic and really disengaged in religion in general. And the I think it was 50% of the white Christians no longer really were going to church like they were. And I know in the Black community, the attendance is really falling off, and I attribute it to you have to speak to the community that you say you're representing. You have to have engagement with them to find out really what they want, and then you have to take that and see how your cadre of political people in your organization, how can we make some of this come to fruition? And again, I'm always with our community, I think we get too much into personalities. I don't like this one and I don't like that one, so I'm not going to do business. And frankly, I'm always saying you do business with the Klan every damn day. You don't know who owns the magazine place, the drink that you buying, or the shirt you're wearing, but you do business. But when you know a black person has a business or what have you, and well, I don't like him, so I'm not going to use the product, even though the product is a great product and the product can really help you. But it's a mindset. And in closing, this is what I will say. The majority community, they have controlled everything for a long time. And they build systems and systems that have fail safe. That's why you go to school and they built the system, teach you how to sit in that classroom so they can prepare you to sit in the office or sit wherever. And we're not seeing that. And we're killing all of our younger generation by trying to fit a round peg into a square hole instead of seeing what the landscape is and devising programs and systems that will work for our community to move the needle forward. And the only thing that I feel counts, changing the law and changing policy, and that's across the board.
Well,
So, with
well,
that being said, as we always close, when you invest in your community, you're really just investing in yourself. Good night.
This is brought to you by Kansas City Business Association, working to improve our community.